The sky above Acheron 7 tore open like wet paper. Not a jump gate, not a wormhole, something older. The air itself seemed to fold, and through the fold came a ship that had no business being anywhere near a quiet human colony. 7.8 kilometers of scarred hull. Weapons ports from weapons no living species recognized. It did not broadcast. It did not challenge. It simply hung in the void, facing 80 capital ships of the Conclave Expansion Directorate, while the man who had called it walked across dusty ground with a dented tin mug in his hand. "We're home," he said. The warship answered, not with weapons, with a single transmission broadcast on every conclave frequency in every known language, in a voice that was not a voice but a resonance. The door was never locked. You only had to knock. I'll be honest. What I saw that day changed everything I thought I knew about what we'd built and what the galaxy thought we were. 71 hours earlier, the crucible of Keth smelled of ozone, old iron, and the particular chemical sweetness of Zarvani ceremonial resin. The scent had greeted every species the conclave had ever absorbed. It was supposed to mean welcome. Today, it meant something else. Archon Drame Vorthak stood at the center of the hollowed asteroid chamber, 280 meters of carved iron silicate stone rising around him like a throat ready to swallow. His scaled carapace was the color of dried blood. 6 vestigial limbs folded beneath robes that weighed enough to crush a human. His eyes, polished obsidian that reflected no light, swept across the tiered galleries, where representatives of 4,200 species sat in judgment. The vote was 398-9. "The device will be decommissioned," Vorthak said. His voice was gravel settling at the bottom of a dry well. "The colony will be cataloged as a low-priority population. Resistance will result in complete administrative dissolution." A small hand rose from the lowest tier. Ambassador Ulari of the listener caste was barely a meter tall, her bioluminescent skin patches flickering pale blue with distress. She had served the conclave for 300 years, longer than most species lasted. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that the translation columns had to strain. "Has anyone," she said, "verified that it broadcasts?" Vorthak's upper lip did not move. Zarvani did not have upper lips in the human sense, but something in his posture shifted, the minute recalculation of a bureaucrat who had overseen the absorption of 19 species and had never once been asked to check his own assumptions. "The beacon has been catalogued for 2,400 years, he said. "The classification is settled." "Settled," Ulari repeated, "is not the same as correct." The galleries murmured. Vorthak let the murmur die. Then he turned to his adjutant, a mortal named Kess with translucent skin and 3 hearts that beat in staggered rhythm, and he gave the order that would send 80 capital ships and 240 support vessels across the Veil of Ash toward a colony that had done nothing but farm dust and raise children for 287 years. Acheron 7 was the kind of place where nothing had happened for 287 years. The irrigation systems were 40 years old and still worked. Children played in the shadow of the Spire of Echoes without knowing what it was. The Colonial Patrol Office had 3 officers and a coffee machine that rattled like a dying engine. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's field notes sat in a filing cabinet that nobody opened. 3,800 pages of careful observation about a structure that hummed. The hum had been background noise for so long that people stopped hearing it. It was a subsonic vibration at 18.7 Hz that made teeth ache and bones resonate. Sergeant Bram Tolan had learned to sleep through it. Lieutenant Nira Callies chewed peppermint gum to cover the pressure in her ears. Dr. Tanaka had measured it for 29 years and concluded in her final report that it was atmospheric interference, probably geological. She was wrong, but she was not wrong yet. Captain Ren Draven sat on the porch of the patrol office, cleaning his boots. He had done this before every major decision for 11 years, since the docking accident on Titan that had taken 2 fingers from his left hand and given him a habit of sitting still. The boots were standard colonial patrol issue, scuffed at the toes from walking the colony's perimeter. The brush was worn to the bristles. He worked the leather in slow circles, the way a man might polish a rifle before a battle he hoped wouldn't come. The transmission arrived at 14:17 local. Draven didn't look up when the office door banged open. He finished the left boot, then the right. Only then did he stand, tuck the brush into his pocket, and walk inside. Lieutenant Callies was chewing her gum fast. Her screen showed the conclave seal, a spiral of 19 species interlocked like a chain. The message was short, the translation was clean. The device-designated spire of echoes is classified as a violation of conclave broadcast protocol. Decommission will occur in 71 hours. The colony of Acheron 7 is designated low priority. Noncompliance will result in administrative dissolution. Draven read it twice. "Sir," Callie said, the gum snapped. "Run a frequency analysis," Draven said. "Full spectrum. I want to know what that thing is actually doing." "Sir, we've run that analysis. Dr. Tanaka ran it for 29 years. It's atmospheric interference." "Run it again," Draven said, "and this time check whether it's broadcasting." He walked back to the porch. The sun was setting over the dust fields, turning the spire of echoes into a black needle against orange light. The structure had been there before the colony, before the conclave, before anything anyone currently alive remembered. It was 40 meters tall, made of a metal that didn't rust, that didn't scratch, that hummed. Draven set his dented tin mug on the railing. The dent matched the shape of Proxima Colony's mountain range, a souvenir from a shore leave 11 years ago, before the accident, before the quiet life of a colony that farmed dust and raised children. He did not know yet that the mug would be the last ordinary object he touched before everything changed. Dr. Yuki Tanaka came to the patrol office at dusk. She was 54, silver hair in a practical bob, carrying a field journal that had seen 29 years of dust storms and solar flares. She did not knock. She had known Draven for 11 years, and she knew that a man cleaning his boots on a porch was not a man who needed knocking. "The inscription," she said without greeting. "Page 2847. I've never shown it to anyone." Draven poured coffee from the machine into his dented mug. He offered it to her. She shook her head. He drank it himself, black and bitter, the way the machine always made it. "Read it," he said. Tanaka opened the journal. Her hands were steady, but her thumb left a smudge on the page, a small human imperfection that would matter later. "When the stars remember," she read, "do not be afraid. The long silence is not abandonment, it is preparation. We do not send warnings, we send ourselves." The coffee machine rattled. Outside, the spire of echoes hummed its 18.7 hertz song into the gathering dark. Draven looked at the inscription for a long time. Then he looked at the conclave transmission on Callie's screen. Then he looked at his boots, still clean, still waiting. "Lieutenant," he said, "the frequency analysis." Callie's was already pulling up the data. Her screen flickered. The gum in her mouth stopped moving. "Sir," she said, "it's not broadcasting, it's receiving. It has always been receiving." The room went quiet. The coffee machine rattled once more, then stopped. Draven set the mug down. He did not look surprised. A man who had lost 2 fingers in a docking accident and spent 11 years cleaning his boots before decisions was not a man who looked surprised by bad news. He was a man who had learned that most disasters announce themselves quietly, in the spaces between what people assumed and what was true. "How long," he asked, "has it been receiving?" "According to the logs," Callie said, 9 hours ago the pattern changed. Before that it was passive. Now it's active. Something is listening." "Or," Tanaka said, Something is waiting for us to speak. Draven walked to the window. The spire of echoes stood against the stars, black and patient. He thought about the inscription. He thought about the Conclave's 80 capital ships. He thought about a device that had been built to receive, not to broadcast, in a galaxy that assumed all technology was aggressive. "Sergeant Tolan," he said. Tolan had been standing in the doorway for 10 minutes, holding his brother's dog tags in one hand and a toolkit in the other. He was 36, 4 deployments, a combat engineer who had learned that the best way to survive a war was to understand the machinery before the shooting started. "Sir," Tolan said, "can you activate it?" Tolan looked at the spire, then at Draven, then at the dog tags in his hand. "I can try," he said. "But sir, if it's been receiving for 2,400 years, what exactly are we sending?" Draven picked up his dented tin mug. He looked at the dent, at the shape of Proxima Colony's mountain range, at the memory of a shore leave before everything went quiet. "A knock," he said. "We're sending a knock." The chastening wing arrived in 71 hours. Vorthak's flagship, the Absolute Measure, dropped out of jump space at the edge of the Veil of Ash with the precision of a species that had been making war for 11,000 years. The ionized gas trail of deceleration painted the nebula in shades of violet and rust. Behind it came the rest of the fleet, 80 capital ships, 240 support vessels, enough firepower to reduce a planet to administrative compliance. Vorthak stood on his bridge, 6 vestigial limbs tucked beneath his robes, obsidian eyes fixed on the tactical display. The colony was a speck. The spire of echoes was a smaller speck. The force he had brought was 4 times what he had used to absorb the Jorotai, a species that had fought for 30 years before their final surrender. "Broadcast the ultimatum," he said. The message went out on every frequency. The translation columns hummed. On Acheron 7, in the patrol office with the rattling coffee machine, Lieutenant Callies received it and did not answer. Vorthak waited. On his bridge, the Morthal Adjutant Kess watched the chronometer with 3 hearts beating in staggered rhythm. The minutes passed, 5 of them, then 10, then 20. "No response," Kess said. Vorthak's carapace did not shift, but his vestigial limbs twitched beneath his robes, the only sign of distress he had shown in 400 years. "Prepare the ground deployment," he said. "If they will not comply, we will decommission the device ourselves." On Acheron 7, Sergeant Tolan stood at the base of the spire of echoes, toolkit open, fingers working the activation sequence that Dr. Tanaka had translated from page 2847. The metal was warm. The hum was louder here, close enough to make his fillings sing. He looked up at the structure, 40 meters of black metal against a sky full of stars. Somewhere out there, 80 ships were waiting to burn it down. Somewhere out there, a species that had been building invitations instead of weapons for 2,400 years had left this thing as a doorbell. Tolan pressed the sequence. The hum stopped. For 4 seconds, there was nothing but the wind across the dust fields and the distant rattle of the coffee machine. Then the sky tore open. Not a jump gate, not a wormhole, something older. And through the fold came the dormant crown. The dormant crown filled the tactical display of the Absolute Measure like a wound in space. Vorthak did not move. For a species that had measured time in millennia, 4 seconds was nothing. But 4 seconds of silence from a ship that had no registry, no energy signature, no classification in any conclave database, that was something he had not prepared for. "Analysis," he said. Kess's translucent hands moved across her console. Her 3 hearts beat faster, the staggered rhythm audible in the quiet bridge. "No broadcast," she said. "No scan, no weapon charge. It is present." "Present," Vorthak repeated. The word had no category in Zarvani military doctrine. Ships were aggressive or defensive. They broadcast or they received. They threatened or they surrendered. Present was not a tactical state. On the display, the crown hung at the edge of the veil of ash, its hull scarred in patterns that suggested battles fought with weapons that had no names in any living language. The scars were not random. They were layered, deliberate, a history written in metal that spoke of engagements across spans of time no current species remembered. Range, Vorthak said. 12,000 kilometers, holding position. Communications. None. It has not transmitted since the initial message. Vorthak's vestigial limbs twitched beneath his robes. He had overseen the absorption of 19 species. He had never faced a ship that simply was. Target the spire, he said. If the device is the anchor, removing it may. Archon, Kess's voice was different. The Morthal did not interrupt superiors. But she was interrupting now. New contacts. The display bloomed with light. 37 additional signatures emerged from the veil of ash. Same hull composition, same energy profile, same silence. They did not accelerate. They did not form an attack pattern. They simply arranged themselves in a perimeter around the crown, around the colony, around the chastening wings. 80 capital ships. 80 ships that had looked like an armada now looked like toys. On Acheron 7, the wind had stopped. Draven stood at the base of the Spire of Echoes, his dented tin mug in his hand. The metal was warm against his palm. Above him, the sky was wrong, not the familiar scatter of stars he had watched for 11 years, but a geometry of ships that turned the night into something crowded and patient. Sergeant Tolan was on his knees, one hand still on the activation console, the other gripping his brother's dog tags so hard the chain had cut into his palm. "Sir," he said, "what did we just do?" Draven looked at the spire. The hum had stopped, but the structure was not silent. It vibrated at a frequency below hearing, a welcome that traveled through the soles of his boots and up into his chest. "We knocked," Draven said. "Now we see who answers." Lieutenant Callies ran from the patrol office, her screen clutched in both hands, peppermint gum forgotten in her mouth. She was 27, xenotech specialist, and she had a photograph of her grandmother's greenhouse taped to the inside of her locker. She had never seen a ship larger than a conclave courier. Now she was looking at 38 of them, and her hands were shaking. "Sir," she said, "the perimeter, they're not moving, they're just waiting." "For what?" "I don't know, but sir, the Crown, it's not a warship, at least not like any warship I've ever seen. The energy signature is wrong. It's not weaponized, it's hospitable." Draven looked at her. "Hospitable." "Like a lighthouse," she said, "or a dock. It's built to receive, not to attack. The others, the 37, they're the same. They're not an invasion force, they're a welcome party." The word hung in the air. On the absolute measure, Vorthak would have called it impossible. On Acheron 7, Draven simply nodded. "Dr. Tanaka," he said. Tanaka had been standing at the edge of the dust field, her silver hair catching the light from the ships above. She walked toward them without hurry, the way a woman walks who has spent 29 years waiting for a question to be answered. "The inscription," she said. "The full text. I never read it aloud because I didn't understand it, but now I think I do." She opened her journal to page 2847. Her voice was steady, but her thumb left the same smudge on the page, the same small human imperfection. "When the stars remember, do not be afraid. The long silence is not abandonment, it is preparation. We do not send warnings. We send ourselves." The wind started again, carrying dust across the field. Above them, the dormant crown did not move. The 37 ships did not move. The chastening wing did not move. For 9 minutes, nobody spoke. Vorthak stood on the bridge of the absolute measure and felt something he had not felt in 734 years. Uncertainty. The tactical display showed the perimeter. 38 ships, None of them broadcasting, none of them charging weapons, all of them simply facing his fleet with the patience of something that had been waiting for 2,400 years and could wait 2,400 more. Archon, Kes said, "The colony, someone is moving." The display zoomed. A single figure walked across the dust field of Acheron 7, carrying something small in one hand. The figure was human, missing 2 fingers on the left hand, wearing standard colonial patrol boots that had been cleaned to a soft shine. "He's carrying a cup," Kes said. "A metal cup. He is walking toward the spire." Vorthak watched. The human reached the base of the structure and set the cup down. Then he spoke into the device, not a command, not a threat, a greeting. The translation columns on the absolute measure caught it. The words were simple. The meaning was not. "We're home." The dormant crown answered. "Not with weapons." With a single transmission, broadcast on every conclave frequency simultaneously, in every known language, in a voice that was not a voice but a resonance that made the fillings in Kes's teeth sing and the obsidian of Vorthak's eyes ache with vibration. The door was never locked, you only had to knock. Vorthak gripped the railing of his bridge. For the first time in 734 years, he understood that he had misread the entire galaxy. The conclave galleries on Keth were silent. Ambassador Ulari sat in the lowest tier, her bioluminescent skin pulsing soft blue. The transmission from the dormant crown had been relayed to every representative of 4,200 species. The translation columns had struggled with the phrase door and knock, were concepts that existed in most languages, but the context was alien. A door that was never locked, a knock that was an invitation. A Zarvani prelate in the middle tier stood. "This is deception. The device was catalogued as a broadcast beacon. The classification is settled." "Settled," Ulari said, "is not the same as correct." She had said it before. Now the galleries heard it differently. The prelate sat down. On the absolute measure, Vorthak turned from the display. His carapace did not shift, but his vestigial limbs were still beneath his robes. The stillness of a predator who had realized the prey was not prey at all. "Archon," Kes said, "the perimeter ships, they are not weapons platforms." Preliminary analysis suggests they are. Archival vessels, preservation ships, they carry no ordnance. Their hull composition suggests they are designed for long-duration storage, not combat. Storage of what? Unknown, but Archon, the crown. It is broadcasting a new signal now, not a message, a frequency, 18.7 Hz, the same as the beacon on Acheron 7. The hum, the welcome. Vorthak looked at the tactical display. 80 capital ships, 240 support vessels, 1 million ground troops, against 38 ships that did not fight, that did not threaten, that simply waited with the patience of a species that had learned to measure time in millennia. "Order the fleet to hold position," he said. "Archon, we will not fire on a welcome." The words cost him something. He did not know what yet, but he felt it in the space between his carapace and his robes, a hollowness where certainty had been. Draven stood at the base of the spire and watched the sky. The dormant crown was closer now, or seemed closer, though its position had not changed. The 37 ships held their perimeter, and the hum, 18.7 Hz, the frequency of a welcome, made his bones resonate in a way that was not unpleasant. Sergeant Tolan had stopped bleeding from the dog tag chain. He stood beside Draven, looking up. "Sir," he said, "what happens now?" Draven picked up his dented tin mug. The metal was warm, the dent familiar under his thumb. He thought about Proxima Colony, about the shore leave 11 years ago, about the accident that had taken his fingers and given him the habit of cleaning his boots before decisions. "Now," he said, "we wait for the galaxy to recalibrate." Lieutenant Callie's console chirped. She looked at the screen, then at Draven, then at the sky. "Sir," she said, "the Conclave fleet. They're not retreating, but they're not advancing, they're just holding." "And the Crown?" "Still waiting, still humming, sir. I think it's waiting for something. Not a command, not a surrender, something else." Draven walked to the edge of the dust field. The spire of echoes stood behind him, black and patient. The colony's irrigation systems were 40 years old and still working. Children were sleeping in houses built from local stone, unaware that the sky above them held the answer to a question their species had forgotten it asked. He raised the mug, not in salute, not in defiance, in greeting. The dormant Crown's hull flickered, not a weapon charge, a light, a single point of illumination on the scarred metal, pulsing in rhythm with the hum. It was answering. On the bridge of the absolute measure, Kess's console registered a new transmission, not from the Crown, from the colony. It was short, it was human, it was not a threat. "Captain Ren Draven, Colonial Patrol, Acheron 7, the door is open. You are welcome to knock." Vorthak read it twice. Then he did something he had not done in 734 years. He asked a question. "Adjutant Kess," he said, "what do we know about a species that builds a receiver and waits 2,400 years for an answer?" Kess's 3 hearts beat in a rhythm that was almost, but not quite, synchronized. She had served the Conclave for 200 years. She had never been asked for an opinion. "Archon," she said, "I think we know that they are patient, and I think we know that patience is a kind of power we have not learned to measure." The display showed the Crown's light, pulsing in rhythm with the hum. The 37 ships held their perimeter. The chastening wing held its position, and somewhere in the space between them, a human captain stood with a dented tin mug, waiting for the galaxy to understand what it had found. Vorthak looked at the transmission. He looked at the tactical display. He looked at the scars on the Crown's hull, scars that spoke of battles fought with weapons that had no names, of a history that predated the Conclave, of a species that had learned to wait. "Send a response," he said, "to the colony, to the Crown, to all frequencies." "What should it say, Archon?" Vorthak's voice was gravel settling at the bottom of a dry well, but there was something new in it, something that might have been, in a species that had a word for it, humility. "Tell them," he said, "that the Conclave is listening." The message went out. On Acheron 7, Draven received it on Lieutenant Callie's console. He read it once. Then he looked at the spire, at the Crown, at the 37 ships that had formed a perimeter not of war but of witness. He did not smile. A man who had lost 2 fingers in a docking accident and spent 11 years cleaning his boots before decisions was not a man who smiled at victories. He was a man who understood that some doors, once opened, could not be closed. "Sir," Callie said, "the Crown, it's moving." Draven looked up. The dormant Crown was not advancing. It was not retreating. It was simply turning slowly, its scarred hull rotating to face a new direction, not toward the Conclave fleet, not toward the colony, but toward the deep space beyond the veil of ash, toward the dark between stars where something else was waiting. Something that had heard the knock and was coming to answer. Something was coming through the dark. Not a ship, not a fleet. The sensors on the absolute measure registered a displacement in space itself, a ripple where no ripple should be, moving toward the veil of ash at a speed that made Kess's 3 hearts stutter in unison. "Archon," she said, "it's not a jump signature, it's not a drive trail, it's awake." Vorthak stared at the display. The ripple was growing, expanding like a stone dropped in still water, and at its center something was forming. Not arriving, remembering itself into existence. On Acheron 7, the hum changed. Lieutenant Callie's felt it first, a shift in the 18.7 Hz vibration that had made her teeth ache for hours. The frequency did not rise. It did not fall. It simply opened, like a chord resolving. "Sir," she said, "the crown, it's not alone anymore." Draven looked up. The dormant crown still faced the deep space beyond the veil of ash, its scarred hull pulsing light in rhythm with the hum. But now the light was not pulsing alone. The 37 perimeter ships were pulsing with it. And beyond them, at the edge of sensor range, new lights were appearing. Not 37, not 38. Hundreds. Dr. Tanaka stood at the edge of the dust field, her journal clutched to her chest. She had spent 29 years studying a structure she thought was a relic. Now she was watching a galaxy remember something it had forgotten. "The long silence," she whispered, "it's ending." The conclave galleries on Keth had not emptied. If anything, they had filled, representatives pressing into the tiers, translation columns straining with the weight of 4,200 species, trying to understand what was happening at the edge of the veil of ash. Ambassador Ulari stood in the lowest tier, her bioluminescent skin pulsing not blue but white, the color of her species' deepest wonder. She had asked a question once. Now she was watching the answer arrive in a language older than the conclave itself. A Zarvani prelate turned to her. "What is it? What is coming?" Ulari looked at the display. The ripple was resolving into shapes now, hulls that matched the crown's scarred composition, emerging from the dark like memories surfacing from a dream. Not a fleet, not an armada. Something that had no word in any current language. "I think," she said, "it is the rest of the message." Vorthak watched the numbers on his tactical display and felt the foundation of his understanding crack. The crown had been one ship. The 37 had been a perimeter, but what was emerging from the ripple was neither. It was a structure. A single, vast structure that dwarfed the crown the way the crown dwarfed his flagship. A hull that was not a hull but a shell, scarred and pitted and ancient, unfolding from the dark like a flower made of metal and time. "Archon," Kess said, her voice was barely audible. "The displacement, it's not a ship, it's a station, or a world." The structure resolved. It was not round, it was not geometric. It was organic in the way that something grown over millennia becomes organic, asymmetrical, layered, scarred in patterns that suggested not battles but weather, erosion, time. And it was singing. Not broadcasting, not transmitting, singing. The same 18.7 Hz hum that had greeted the conclave on Acheron 7, but now amplified across the entire veil of ash, resonating through the hulls of every ship in the chastening wing, through the galleries of Keth, through the bones of every species that had ears to hear it. "The door was never locked," the crown had said. Vorthak understood now. The door was not a metaphor, the door was real, and it had just opened. Draven walked to the spire of echoes. The dust field was quiet, the colony slept. Children dreamed of irrigation systems and dust storms, unaware that the sky above them held the answer to a question their species had asked 2,400 years ago, and then forgotten. He set his dented tin mug on the base of the spire. The metal was warm. The dent, the shape of Proxima Colony's mountain range, caught the light from the ships above. Sergeant Tolan stood beside him, his brother's dog tag still in his hand. The chain had left a mark on his palm. He did not seem to notice. "Sir," Tolan said, "what is it, the thing that's coming?" Draven looked at the sky. The structure was visible now, even to the naked eye, a shape that blocked stars, that turned the night into something crowded and patient and old. "I don't know," Draven said. "But I think it's what we were waiting for." "And if it's not?" Draven picked up his mug. He did not drink from it. He simply held it, feeling the familiar shape of the dent under his thumb. "Then we clean our boots," he said, "and we make the next decision." The structure stopped. Not at the perimeter, not at the crown. It stopped at the edge of the veil of ash, its hull facing the chastening wing with the patience of something that had traveled across spans of time no living species measured. It did not broadcast. It did not challenge. It simply waited, humming, while the crown and its 37 ships pulsed light in rhythm with its song. Vorthak stood on the bridge of the absolute measure and felt something he had not felt in 734 years. Small. Archon Kes said, "The structure, it is not a weapon. Preliminary analysis confirms what the crown suggested. It is archival, a preservation vessel. But the scale, Archon, the scale is beyond anything we have catalogued." How large? Unknown, but the displacement suggests it could contain everything, every record, every species, every thought that has ever been transmitted in this galaxy. Vorthak looked at the structure. He looked at the crown. He looked at the 37 ships that had formed a perimeter not of war but of witness. Then what, he asked, is it preserving? Kes's 3 hearts beat in a rhythm that was almost, but not quite, synchronized. She had served the conclave for 200 years. She had never seen an Archon ask a question he did not already know the answer to. "Archon," she said, "I think it is preserving us. I think it has been listening to every broadcast, every transmission, every signal we have ever sent. And I think it is waiting for us to send something worth keeping." The words hung on the bridge. Outside, the structure hummed. The crown pulsed. The 37 ships held their perimeter. And on Acheron 7, a man with 2 missing fingers stood in a dust field with a dented tin mug, waiting for the galaxy to understand what it had found. The transmission came not from the structure, not from the crown. It came from everywhere at once. A voice that was not a voice but a resonance, broadcast on every frequency, in every language, in a pattern that made the translation columns on Keth weep with the effort of comprehension. "We are the long silence," it said. "We are what remains of the species that built the doors. We do not send warnings. We do not send threats. We send ourselves. And we have been waiting for you to remember that you are not alone." The galleries on Keth were silent. 4,200 species sat in judgment, and none of them spoke. Then Ambassador Ulari stood. She was barely a meter tall, her bioluminescent skin pulsing white with wonder. She raised one small hand and spoke into the silence. "We remember," she said. "We are listening." On the absolute measure, Vorthak stared at the transmission and felt the last of his certainty dissolve. He had come to decommission a device. He had brought 80 capital ships and 240 support vessels and 1 million ground troops to erase a colony that had done nothing but farm dust and raise children. He had done this because the classification was settled, because the beacon was a broadcast device, because efficiency was the highest moral good. And now he was looking at a structure that had traveled across spans of time, no living species measured, carrying the preserved thoughts of every species that had ever transmitted a signal, waiting for someone to knock on a door that had never been locked. Archon Kes said, "The structure. It is sending a new signal, not to us, to the colony, to the Spire of Echoes." "What does it say?" Kes's translucent skin flickered with the effort of translation. "It says, 'Welcome home, the door is open, we have been waiting.'" Vorthak looked at the tactical display. The chastening wings 80 capital ships looked like toys against the scale of what was emerging from the dark. The structure was not a weapon. It was not a threat. It was an invitation. And he had brought an army to a doorbell. Draven heard the transmission on Kali's console. He did not move. He stood at the base of the spire, his dented tin mug in his hand, and listened to a voice that was older than the conclave, older than the Zarvani, older than any species currently alive. "Welcome home," it said. "The door is open. We have been waiting." The words were simple. The meaning was not. Sergeant Tolan looked at Draven. "Sir," he said, "what do we do?" Draven looked at the sky. The structure was visible now, a vast shape that blocked stars and hummed with the patience of something that had learned to measure time in millennia. The crown pulsed light in rhythm with the song. The 37 ships held their perimeter, and beyond them, beyond the veil of ash, something else was moving. Not a ship, not a fleet, something that made the structure look small. "Sir," Toland said again. Draven raised his mug, not in salute, not in defiance, in greeting. "We answer," he said. "We always answer." The structure's hull flickered. The hum changed key, not a warning, not a welcome, but something deeper, something that sounded like recognition. And from the dark beyond the veil of ash, the new shape resolved. It was not a ship, it was not a station, it was a door. And it was opening. The door was not made of metal. Draven saw that first. It was made of light, or something that looked like light, but older, the color of a star that had burned out long before the conclave existed. It opened not with a sound but with a feeling, a pressure in the chest that made Sergeant Toland drop his brother's dog tags and grip the activation console with both hands. "Sir," Toland said, his voice was barely a whisper, "what do we do?" Draven looked at the door. He looked at his dented tin mug still in his hand. He looked at the sky, where the structure hummed and the crown pulsed and the 37 ships held their witness. "We knock," he said, "one more time." He walked toward the spire, not fast, not slow, the way a man walks who has spent 11 years cleaning his boots before decisions. The dust rose around his boots with each step. The hum grew louder. The light from the door washed across the field, turning the dust into something that looked like gold. Behind him, Toland picked up his brother's dog tags. He did not put them in his pocket. He held them in his fist, the chain cutting fresh marks into his palm, and he followed. On the bridge of the absolute measure, Vorthak watched the door open and felt the last of his framework collapse. He had built his life on the assumption that all technology was aggressive, that all signals were broadcasts, that all species, given time, would expand and absorb and conquer because that was what species did. That was what the Zarvani had done for 11,000 years. That was what efficiency demanded. And now he was watching a door open in space, built by a species that had waited 2,400 years for someone to knock, carrying a structure that preserved every thought ever transmitted, humming a welcome at a frequency that made his bones ache with something that was not pain. "Archon," Kess said, "the door, it is not a weapon, it is not a threat, it is an invitation." "I know," Vorthak said. He had never said, "I know," to a subordinate before. Archons did not acknowledge the obvious. Archons commanded. Archons decided. Archons did not stand on bridges and watch doors open in space and feel small. But he was feeling small, and he was not turning away. "Order the fleet," he said. "All ships hold position. No one fires, no one moves, we will watch." "Archon." "We will watch," Vorthak said again, "because we have been wrong, and because being wrong is not the same as being finished." Draven reached the base of the spire. The door hung in the air above him, vast and patient and old. The light from it did not hurt his eyes. It simply was the color of a star that had burned out, the color of a welcome that had waited 2,400 years. He set his dented tin mug on the base of the spire. The metal clicked against the ancient metal. The dent, the shape of Proxima Colony's mountain range, caught the light and held it. "Dr. Tanaka," he said without turning. The inscription, the last line. Tanaka had followed him across the field. Her journal was open to page 2847. Her hands were steady, but her silver hair had come loose from its bob, and she did not bother to push it back. "We do not send warnings," she read. "We send ourselves." Draven nodded. He looked at the door. He looked at the mug. He looked at the 2 fingers missing from his left hand, the memory of a docking accident that had taught him to sit still before decisions. Then he stepped through. The light was not blinding, it was not warm, it was not cold. It was simply full. Draven stood in a space that was not a space, A chamber that had no walls, no ceiling, no floor, only the sense of being held. Around him, shapes moved. Not bodies, not machines, memories given form. The preserved thoughts of every species that had ever transmitted a signal, arranged in patterns that made the conclave's 4,200 species look like a single voice in a chorus. And in the center of it all, a figure. Not human, not Zarvani, not anything that had a name in any current language. It was made of the same light as the door, the same color of a burned-out star. It looked at Draven, or seemed to look, though it had no eyes in the conventional sense, and it spoke in a voice that was not a voice but a resonance. "You knocked," it said. Draven nodded. "We did. We have been waiting." "I know." The figure moved closer, not walking, simply becoming nearer, the way a memory becomes clearer when you focus on it. "Your species," it said. "You built the door, you built the beacon, you sent yourselves into the long silence, and then you forgot." "We forgot," Draven said. "Why?" Draven looked at his hands, at the 2 missing fingers, at the 11 years of cleaning his boots before decisions, at the colony that farmed dust and raised children and had done nothing worth preserving for 287 years. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe we got busy. Maybe we got scared. Maybe we decided that waiting was the same as being weak." The figure was silent. The chamber hummed. The memories of 4,200 species swirled around them, waiting. "Waiting," the figure said, "is not weakness. Waiting is the only strength that outlasts time." Vorthak watched the display and saw something he had not expected. Draven had stepped through the door, the light had swallowed him. For a moment there was nothing, no signal, no transmission, no reading. Then the light pulsed, once, twice, 3 times. And then Draven walked out. He was carrying something, not a weapon, not a device. A cup, his dented tin mug, the one with the dent that matched Proxima Colony's mountain range. But the dent was different now. It glowed, not with heat, with light. The same light as the door, the same color of a burned-out star. He walked across the dust field, back toward the patrol office, back toward the colony that farmed dust and raised children. He did not look at the sky. He did not look at the chastening wings 80 capital ships. He simply walked, carrying his mug, while the light from the dent illuminated the dust around his feet. Tolan met him at the edge of the field. "Sir," he said, "what is it?" Draven looked at the mug. The light in the dent pulsed in rhythm with the hum. "It's a message," he said, "from the long silence. They want us to remember that we built the doors, and they want us to keep building them." He walked past Tolan, past Callie's, past Tanaka with her journal open to page 2847. He walked to the patrol office, to the porch where he had cleaned his boots 11 years ago, to the railing where he had set his mug and watched the sun set over the dust fields. He set the mug on the railing. The light in the dent pulsed against the orange sky. On the absolute measure, Vorthak watched the light from Draven's mug and felt something shift in his chest. Not a crack, not a break, a door opening. "Archon," Kes said, "the fleet, they are waiting for orders." Vorthak looked at the tactical display. The chastening wings 80 capital ships, the dormant crown, the 37 ships, the structure beyond the veil of ash, and the door still open, still humming, still waiting. "Order the retreat," he said. "Archon." "Order the retreat," Vorthak said again. "We came to decommission a device. We learned that the device was a doorbell. We brought an army to a welcome. It is time to go home." Kess's 3 hearts beat in a rhythm that was almost, but not quite, synchronized. She had served the conclave for 200 years. She had never heard an Archon admit error. "And the colony?" she asked. Vorthak looked at the display. Draven stood on the porch of the patrol office, his mug on the railing, the light from the dent pulsing against the sky. The colony's irrigation systems were 40 years old and still working. Children were sleeping in houses built from local stone. A man with 2 missing fingers had just walked through a door in space and come back with a light in his cup. The colony, Vortex said, will be reclassified. Not as low priority, as something we do not yet have a category for. He turned from the display. His robes weighed 12 kilograms, but they felt lighter than they had in 734 years. His vestigial limbs twitched beneath the fabric, not with distress, but with something that might have been, in a species that had a word for it, hope. "Send a final transmission," he said, "to the colony, to the crown, to the long silence." "What should it say, Archon?" Vorthak's voice was gravel settling at the bottom of a dry well, but the well was not dry anymore. "Tell them," he said, "that we are listening, and that we will keep listening for as long as it takes." The chastening wing withdrew. Not in retreat, not in defeat. In something that had no name in Zarvani military doctrine, a withdrawal that was not surrender, but recognition. The ships turned, their ionized gas trails painting the veil of ash in shades of violet and rust, and they jumped back toward the crucible of Keth. The dormant crown did not move. The 37 ships did not move. The structure beyond the veil of ash did not move. They simply hummed, pulsed, and waited. On Acheron 7, the dust settled. 2 weeks later, Ambassador Ulari stood before the conclave galleries. The vote to censure humanity had never been called. The vote to reclassify the colony had been tabled indefinitely. 4,200 species sat in their tiers, and the translation columns hummed with a new frequency. Not the old broadcast channels, but the 18.7 Hz hum that had greeted the conclave on Acheron 7. "What if," Ulari said, "the species we call young are only young because they chose to wait?" The galleries were silent. Then, one by one, the representatives began to hum, not in unison, not in harmony, simply in recognition, the hum of a door that had never been locked, the hum of a welcome that had waited 2,400 years. The dormant crown remained in orbit around Acheron 7. The 37 ships remained in the veil of ash. The structure remained beyond them, its door still open, its archives still preserving every thought ever transmitted. They did not move. They did not speak. They simply waited. And the beacon's hum resumed. Not at the old frequency, not at a new one. It simply changed key from a warning to a welcome, from "stay away" to "you are expected." Draven sat on the porch of the patrol office, cleaning his boots. The dented tin mug sat on the railing, its light pulsing in rhythm with the hum. Lieutenant Callies chewed peppermint gum at half her usual speed. Sergeant Tolan carried his brother's dog tags in his pocket, the chain no longer cutting his palm. Dr. Tanaka filed her journal in the cabinet that nobody opened, page 2847 now marked with a note in her own hand. "The door is open." The sun set over the dust fields. The irrigation systems rattled. Children played in the shadow of the spire of echoes, and this time they looked up. The hum did not stop. It simply changed key, from a warning to a welcome, from "stay away" to "you are expected." The mug pulsed. The dust turned gold, and somewhere in the dark beyond the veil of ash, something that had been waiting for 2,400 years hummed back.